being the esteemed journalist that she is my next guest. Journalist for 38 years, also managing director of the Lloyd Institute of the West Indies, former Trinidad Express editor-in-chief and head of news for TV6. Her name is Sunity Maharaj. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's always good to have you. Good morning. I think I lost my connection to this phone.
No,
just doing
you lost me.
There we go.
All the time.
There we go. So we are good now. And I was merely mentioning how long you've been in the business for 30 years. And so it's a great welcome to have you here. Also director of the Lloyd Institute of the West Indies, former Trinidad and Tobago editor-in-chief and TV6 head of news. Sunity Maharaj, great to have you here this morning.
Great to be there, as always.
All right, let us talk about Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro is an icon in the world, depending on what side of the world you come down on. Folks will say he is a hero. Others would say he was a dictator. Bottom line is he had massive influence in the region. This is Latin America and the Caribbean. Speak to, if you had to describe Fidel Castro's achievement and his influence in this sphere, how would you describe it?
I think a flag bearer. I think he kept a flag flying for radical movements, for resistance, for popular resistance against old and new colonial structures. I bear in mind that as Cuba was a Spanish colony, but it's a fight under Castro was against what it called neo-imperialism, which is the American influence or attempt to control it. I think he stood as that figure. History, as they say, will judge him, and a lot of people are, expressing their own opinions on him, but nothing changes what has already happened and what he has done. You don't have to have a position even, you just have to document it, and you will see the impact of what he did, and the longevity. That has been probably one of the more amazing things. I was reading today about the number of plots against him. Hundreds of plots. Was really a miracle that he survived.
And that includes, at one time, taking someone who was very close to him and trying to use her as the person to, in fact, create, be the cause of the death of Fidel Castro.
Yeah, so you fell out of...
there we go. Are we back now? All right.
Yeah.
There's a little problem I'm having here, but I will keep working between it, and that will take care of it. Let's talk about Fidel Castro's influence in the Caribbean. A lot of folks said he was an iconic figure. He was, in fact, a beacon for forward thinkers and or leftist thinkers. But if not directly, indirectly, he influenced a lot of mindsets, whether you go to Bolivia, you go to Venezuela, you go to Grenada.
Yeah, I mean, he was an axis, and Cuba was an axis around which the left organized itself in the Caribbean. Now, we talk in terms of right and left, but in the Caribbean, it is probably not even the most accurate of terms. It is what you would call progressive movements or anti-colonial movements that have not bought into the development model that has been left by Britain and France and so on, and Spain in the Caribbean. Cuba provided an anchor and a point of support. Let us not forget the role that Cuba played in Grenada. I mean, that was not indirect. That was a very direct line of support. And by the time Maurice Bishop came to power there, Castro was already an elder statesman and providing a certain kind of steady hand, as it were. And I think there are ways in which his own experience taught him about the importance of having a less confrontational approach, having taken power by the gun. And so, I mean, there's some of the literature where he encourages Maurice Bishop's government to approach the world in a somewhat different way to which he had. Then we have, in Trinidad, you have had quite a number of organizations, and up to today, that seek succor and support and inspiration from the Cuban Revolution as an example of the possibility of change. Then you have active, but we also do have non-political linkages Right? Cuba is a place that people from the Eastern Caribbean, like ourselves, routinely go to for medical treatment.
Mm-hmm.
We have business that is developing. Sasha Cosmetics, one of their biggest markets, is Cuba, and so on. So the political relationship, and this is a point of contention for us, because where we are in the world, that cross-section, as it were, that crossing between East and West, the whole Cold War period of attitudes, where the Caribbean was constantly being forced to choose the American side, and because of America's own need to secure its borders and to secure the hemisphere for in its own interest, regularly created rifts within the CARICOM bloc. You would have and a very good example of that was in 1983 when the Americans invaded Grenada, and when CARICOM itself was split on whether there should be active support for the Americans. Trinidad and Tobago under George Chambers maintained a position of non-interference. It said it would not act on its own without CARICOM agreeing that this is what it should do. On the other hand, Dominica, with Eugenia Charles and Tom Adams and Barbados, went with the Americans and gave that tactical or logistical support.
My guest is Sunity Maharaj. We are talking about Fidel Castro and his contribution and influence. Rafiq Shah says in an article in today's papers of the influence that he had on him too. There are a lot of folks who say that the revolution will continue through Raul Castro, his brother, who of course was with him from the very beginning. But since Raul has been there, what we have had is an opening up, as it were, of trade and relations with the West, which sort of say that there is a whole new Cuba, and that seemed to have given some impetus to the Cubans in Miami, for instance, who feel that they will get a chance to return to the Batista era kind of thing in Cuba. Many are saying if anyone comes in with that thinking, they're going to be very disappointed. What is your take on both areas? One is those who are thinking of returning to Cuba, going back to that era, 55 sort of time, and those who feel that through Raul Castro, there is a moving forward for Cuba.
Yeah, well, I have always speculated that Raul was not acting purely on his own in opening up Cuba. If you were to ask me to guess, I would say Castro, the other Castro, Fidel. He knew what was going on after 1989 and the collapse of the Berlin Wall and that whole era, end of the Cold War. And then, having lost the financial support when the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia could no longer afford that level of support for Cuba, I think he knew what was going on. I think he smelled the coffee. And so I think he knew that Cuba had to evolve, but on its own terms. Perhaps, one, he fell ill, but two, I think Castro, if he had the choice, might not have wanted to be part of that process. He certainly was on in age as well. And so I don't think that there is anything that Raul Castro has done that would not have had the support of his brother, or certainly a knowledge that this has to happen, although he always reserved the right as an individual to issue a long statement condemning certain things and Obama and whatever. But I think he knew that the crossing, this is the 21st century, and for Cuba to survive, what it has to do. Now, the issue about the Cubans in Miami and the people thinking you can return to the Batista age is that the challenge for Castro, for this generation in Cuba of leaders, is how to negotiate change without going back to the past. Cuba is not the same Cuba. There is that Batista led. There is an opening up to business. There's private business that is taking place. There's transfer of land, purchase and selling of land, and changes that have taken place. But I think the central economy is very tightly under the control of the Cuban government. A lot of things remain under control, and the challenge for them will be how do they release the reins and retain control. And this is not something that anybody can say it is necessarily going to go in one direction or the other. It's always fluid, it's always dynamic, and it's always, in the case of a people who experience revolution, the ability to keep their trust. So the money will come in, money will have a certain amount of influence in the society. How are you going to, we have seen countries try to flirt with their own historical economic legacies and bring into it, as happened in Japan, a different kind of a capitalist model, and go under. The economy just takes off because there are all these global tastes that people have acquired, and suddenly they give up what they know, and their food and whatever, and they want to import whatever is being made in America. This is the test. It is the test that this is where we will know if history has absolved Castro. That when the opportunity presents itself, where will the Cuban people stand? Has their revolution been deeper and sustained enough where they have that pride in themselves, their interest in their own, the things that we don't have, which is why our import bill is so high. Now, Cuba consumes what it makes and so on, but we don't know if this is by force because they don't have much choice, or is this their preference? Is the Cuban identity so solid that it could stand up against any assault on itself? And I think these are things that we will have to be fascinated by to see how it unfolds.
Wait and see how that unfolds. Sunity, Maharaj, thank you so much for your perspective this morning. It is truly appreciated and